Tonight's meeting to order. Apologies for my tardiness. Okay. Ellie, would you like to give some preliminary meeting information?
Ellie Mullins, good evening and welcome to the October 17th Historic Resources Commission meeting. Tonight we also have Lynn Braddock-Zollner, the Historic Resources Administrator, and Avery Kerner, Planner 2. Together we will work alongside the chair to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Before we begin, I have just a few reminders to share. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. For those who are attending the meeting virtually, please remember to mute yourself when you are not actively speaking to help minimize distractions. When the chair calls for public comment on an item, anyone attending in person may approach the podium to speak. If you are attending the meeting virtually and would like to provide public comment on an item, please use the raise hand feature to be called upon. We also ask that everyone state their name before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. Now I'll turn the meeting back over to the chair.
Thank you, Ellie. Now we'll take a roll call of the commission. Commissioner Haynes?
Commissioner Haynes, present.
Commissioner Klein?
Commissioner Klein, present.
Commissioner Buchanan?
Commissioner Buchanan here.
Commissioner Dearborn?
Commissioner Dearborn here.
Commissioner Cunningham?
Commissioner Cunningham, present.
And Chair Coleman is present, obviously. All right. Let's see.
Communications.
Yes, thank you. Communications. Have we received any communications from the State Historic Preservation Officer or the general public?
You have no communications this evening.
Okay, thank you. Disclosure of ex parte communications from commissioners? I think I don't know if I need to disclose this or not, but I had some discussions about the Land Development Code meeting with the HRC. Not really a project, but yeah.
You might do that during committee reports.
Okay.
That would be a good time.
Great. Any declarations of abstentions for specific agenda items from commissioners? No? Okay, committee reports.
As Joy mentioned, as part of the Lawrence Preservation Alliance's request to you last month to meet with the consultants that were doing the revision to the Land Development Code, and there's kind of a timing issue going on. So your letter is on later this evening for you to approve, and that will go to the City Commission. But Joy had the opportunity to meet with the consultant and a representative from the Lawrence Preservation Alliance, just trying to keep them on schedule and everything. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the meeting?
Sure. We met with the consultant that is working with the city. Jeff Frick was also on the call with two representatives from the Lawrence Preservation Alliance and myself. And we discussed some of the high points that were mentioned in the letter from last month about the Land Development Code and the changes to increase density and what that might do with neighborhoods, properties that are not listed but are potentially historically significant, and more important in the short term, those in the survey areas of University Place and what was the other one?
The NAACP.
Yes.
survey.
Yes, the NAACP survey. So we talked about what could be changed in the Land Development Code, or what our concerns were, really. That's what the meeting was about. And the concern is we will lose potentially significant properties, structures, because there's an incentive, it seems, written into the code to allow these to be torn down, and then more property or more of the lot could be built and then occupied by more people, and the parking count requirement going down and all that. And so the idea of, well, maybe we also need to talk about the demolition chapter of the city ordinance. And that might be a way that we could strengthen our language there, because there's no review method for those demolitions unless they are in a historic district or in the environs of a historic property. So that was discussed, not a land development code issue, though. That would be an ordinance, Chapter 5, Article 12, I think, issue. So, that's kind of where we left it. I think the city commission has met this week to review land development code changes. And then we have the letter drafted that's in the packet. It's at the end of the meeting, though.
Yes.
So as part of this meeting, we will decide whether or not to send that letter to the city commission to ask for 3 things. Should we just talk about it now,
Or we can wait
Can
till
wait,
the end.
okay.
But you gave us a good update on
Yeah,
that meeting.
that was
That's very
basically
good.
what it was. Okay.
Are they fairly receptive?
The consultant said, of course, I'm just the consultant, and the city commission, if they direct the consultant to do certain things, the consultant will do the things. There were some typos, and I don't know that they were typos, but misstatements about, there was one, adaptive reuse being encouraged on historic properties, which later then it said rehabilitation. So we talked about that language, and so she can make those kinds of changes to make the document actually reflect state law and Secretary Interior Standards language. So she'll do that, but yeah. Okay, any other questions? No? Any other committee reports? No. All right, moving on to item B, consent agenda.
I would move approval of the attached design review applications, which have been administratively reviewed and approved by staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Klein. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Haynes. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries 6-0. Now it's time for public comment. If there is anyone in the room or online who would like to address the commission and make statements or speak about anything that is not on the agenda, now is the time to do so. Yes, come forward to the microphone, please. State your name.
I'm Anson Stancliffe, and I kind of was invited to talk about the 2023 pedestrian improvement project on the effects of Old West Lawrence, because it just went down Arkansas and 8th Street. And so I live on that corner there. And last Friday I came home to about 8 feet of historical registered bricks pulled up by a backhoe. I did spend the next 2 days pulling out 260 bricks out of that. But I ended up working with the city on that Monday, and we had it resolved and the rest of the bricks removed by hand. But I guess I was just asked to speak about it. I don't know if I have much more to say than that, but...
Okay.
I happen to have heard about it through a grapevine. Were you ever contacted at all that this was going to happen?
Well, I think the problem is that my mother passed recently, and so I've just recently moved into the home, so I don't know if that is where the miscommunication was, but it certainly seemed like I've gone through all her papers and I did not find anything. That doesn't mean it wasn't thrown out, but from what it seems like, she had never talked to me about a lot of what was happening, and I think a lot of the confusion was I did not understand that the sidewalk was going to have to drop 2 feet from where it was, which is understandable, but it made it confusing as to where the new concrete ramps would start and the brick road would, or the brick sidewalk would continue. So that was kind of the main confusion on my part. I think the biggest deal was just the backhoeing out of bricks and damaging quite a few. And as we know, you can't get those bricks anymore, and they're over 100 years old at this point.
Well, and that's why I just wanted to say how I found it incredibly appalling that happened, and I'm really sorry that it did happen on your property. But I also want to thank you with all gratitude for saving what bricks you could, because as you say, those bricks are incredibly historical and important, and so I trust you'll use them in a good way on your property, and not, and the city will deal with the sidewalk and the ADA access. But thank you so much.
The essentially what we're going to do is use the bricks that were removed to expand what still is existing brick sidewalk to the 5-foot wide standard that they're moving to.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank
I'm
you.
David.
yes.
You and I communicated
Yes.
a bit offline. I'm glad you showed up. What's happening in the rest of the neighborhood with the backhoe and?
So I think we might have been the last of the brick. I think potentially most of that was all removed back in the 50s on the Arkansas side, and pretty much the brick only existed down 8th Street, is from what I know of historically, from at least growing up there from 1985. So that, from what I can tell, is when I grew up, the corner on the Arkansas side, it basically had like a concrete step up, and then it went to the bricks, and that would have been removed probably somewhere in the 90s, and they just sloped it at an extreme angle to have a ramp, which is obviously silly in some ways, and so now they're actually making it so it's wheelchair accessible. But the section they first tore out was that brick vertical up to the height of the rest of the street or sidewalk.
Okay. Do you feel that the interaction you had with the city you had mentioned was positive?
Yeah, I mean, once the city stepped in, everyone was great. I mean, we had everyone out there. I mean, it was great. The person who came up with the new brick sidewalk policy came out. ADA came out, city surveyor, city engineer, and the project manager. So we had everyone, and I think once we had everyone, it was a lot easier to, as the homeowner, to say, it'd be nice if the ramp doesn't go past my gate, and we were able to shorten that by a few feet. And then they said, well, the landing needs to be, they have to have a landing space for wheelchairs. And I said, well, does that have to be concrete? And they said, actually, no, it doesn't. So we were able to then make that brick as well. And that will be kind of nice, because then I can see how the city does the 5-foot widening, and then I can just match that on the rest of the way down.
I mean, it sounds like a bad situation turned out pretty good.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think once everyone was involved, and again, it might just be a bellwether thing where I'm the first in this neighborhood, and I think it's hard for a lot of people who don't live in these areas to understand that the people who do live here, we like those qualities of the neighborhood, and so if you didn't grow up around it, I think it's maybe a little bit of a foreign concept, and the idea of pulling all those bricks out might have just been a foreign concept if you didn't grow up there. And so I've actually repaired those sidewalks in different areas of the city and have a much more familiarity of how they're constructed.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Glad you did what you did.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I really am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Any other
Thank you very much
questions?
for letting us know. I've got a question for Len. So when the contractors go out to do the work, is there anything in their scope of work that says if you encounter bricks, you need to kind of change how you remove them? And if it wasn't for a homeowner speaking out, it sounds like we could have lost a lot of bricks. So is there anything happening?
Some of the contracts do say that. I didn't review this one, so I'm not sure because it went through the ADA transition plan. But I will check into that and see. I had been made aware by the person who did the brick streets and sidewalk policy. Y'all met her when she came to talk to you. She let me know that that had happened and that they were taking care of it, and that it shouldn't happen again. So
Okay.
I'll follow up.
And I'll say she was really wonderful to work with. She was really
Good.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a pamphlet on how to rebuild the sidewalks to the new standard.
Cool.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll, unless there's other public comment, I only saw one person. Okay. Now we'll move on to public hearing items, Part D of the meeting. Item number 1, HRC 241014.
Good evening, Commissioners. Lynn Braddock-Zollner, Historic Resources Administrator, here this evening to bring back a project to you that you approved in August. It is 1347 Tennessee Street. It's new construction on a vacant lot, and the review is for the Oread Neighborhood Design Guidelines. When this shows the location of the vacant lot here. When the applicant continued to work on the project and got ready to do construction drawings, they made some changes to the plan, and they were significant enough that staff was not comfortable approving those changes administratively. So we've brought it back to you this evening for you to look at and vote as the commission. This is showing the structure as it was approved. And here's that north elevation and then the front. And then this is the revision, and I have a slide that will show you exactly what that is. But what happened is they narrowed up these windows here on the ground level, and then these were 3 windows, and they narrowed those down to 2. And on the north side, instead of running the stone all the way back down the side of the building, they stopped it at this brick section of the building. On this side, they moved, this window used to be on the 2nd story, and they moved it down. And then, let's see, this shows where they've marked out where they made those changes. So this width was reduced. And then there again, they didn't run the stone along the side. Staff reviewed these changes using the Oread Neighborhood Design Guidelines and found that the changes still, the project overall still meets those design guidelines. I will say staff was a little bit disappointed in changing these windows to the 2 windows. Staff felt that the previous version that had the 3 windows was a little more compatible. I'll go back and look at that. This version was a little bit more compatible, but actually that the changes to the north side actually improved the structure, because you won't see most of the rear part that doesn't have the stone, and you got added that nice brick column with the stone in front of it. But overall, the project does meet the Oread neighborhood design guidelines, and staff is recommending that you find that the proposed project meets the development and design standards and the Oread neighborhood design guidelines for the Oread neighborhood design overlay district. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Klein.
I drive by that down Tennessee a lot, and I'm still kind of confused. I understand the empty lot, and we're talking about that's the building that's going to go in the empty lot, but I'm also seeing the brick building next to it looks like it's been emptied out.
It is under construction as well. They're doing a rehabilitation on that building.
Okay.
Changing it to 2 congregate residents.
Okay, so there's 2 projects happen to be, just so happen to be simultaneously being rehabbed or redone, obviously. Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant present, or?
I believe they're online.
Oh, yes.
Jeff McBee with Paul Werner Architects.
Yes, hello. How are you?
Hi. Good. How are you?
Good. Did you have anything that you wanted to say? You don't have to.
Nope, I do not.
Okay. Thank you.
I will say the reason it went down from 3 to 2 windows is just for some more privacy. It is a bedroom, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Is there any public comment on this item? No? Any thoughts from commissioners? I reviewed it with ARC, and that's how we got from, June, I think, until now. Or
I don't exactly know how we're evaluating it, but the 3-window front seems much better to me than the 2-window front. Although neither side bothers me the least.
Yeah, the 3-window front is what they had initially. And if you look at the historic brick building that Commissioner Klein was referring to, it does have the 3-window openings. And
I would like to see that continuity.
Yes.
Well, that's why, the building, because the building next door is brick, and again, the size of the windows, that's why I was curious if there might be any crossover of any kind in any of the design elements such as windows.
Right. Well, I think yes, it would look better, but as submitted, it does meet the guidelines. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve.
Second.
Do we need any further discussion? No. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. We'll move on to public item number 2, number DR 24-00004.
This is also a project that you saw earlier this year. It says 609 New Hampshire Street, but it's actually the end of that building, and it's been readdressed now for Q39. It is a rehabilitation of that one section of the building. It's a certificate of approval review as well as a downtown design guidelines review. This is showing the property location. This whole area is the old Journal World printing company, and the portion that we're talking about is this section right here. This is showing that east elevation, and this is the portion of the building that we're talking about. And then just a little bit better review. That's the existing currently. This shows what the Historic Resources Commission approved earlier this year with the, they needed smokers, and there was no way to add those to the rear because the building goes straight up to the alley and there was no place on the side. So there was a small addition on the front of the structure that will be white brick to have that smoking area for the kitchen. And then there was this multi-pane storefront area. This area here was to be painted white. And then this is currently the loading dock, and so it stayed and had columns and a canopy. This is the rendering that shows what was approved by the HRC, with the door here and the brick here, and these are openings that existed in the building. And just another view showing that addition here, and then this portion of the loading dock was open. And showing that loading dock still being open here, and then the addition. This is the revised site plan. It's a little messy, so it's kind of hard to see, but when the applicant went through the site planning process, they had to consolidate their drives and only have one drive. So they chose to use this drive and have their parking area here on the south portion of the lot. That allowed them to use the north area as an outdoor dining area, and then have a main entrance here on the north end of the building. And what they did when they had these changes is they decided to enclose the entire loading dock, and you can see that line right here, and have garage doors that open the space to the building so that they can close this entire loading dock area off. This is a little blow up of the site plan showing the outdoor dining area here, the main entrance to the building here, and then the parking area on that south portion of the lot. This kind of shows you what's going on with the building. You see that the wall has been brought out to the line of the building for this addition that you have already approved. And then now it continues along almost to that north wall, with these being garage doors that would open. And this is an elevation drawing showing what that looks like, with these being the operable garage doors and still having, no, this is the one that was approved, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is the new one, and you can see the operable garage doors, the main entrance, and then the other addition that's been approved. And just another view of that showing the outdoor dining in front and the retaining wall that they're going to build to enclose the outdoor dining. So staff went back through the review criteria in Chapter 22 and looked at the context area and looked at a few different things, and also for the downtown design guidelines. We don't really have any operable garage doors in the downtown conservation overlay district, and we certainly don't have any in the context area of the listed property. There are garage doors that were used for garage door purposes, but not the clear garage doors that open up for an outdoor dining bar eating space. So it was really the guidelines are silent, and so it comes to compatibility for the certificate of approval. This end of the warehouse building is unique for the context area. It really doesn't have a relationship with the rest of the context area. You have the old post office on the corner that kind of separates it from the rest of the downtown district. And then, of course, the portion of the structure to the north is very different from what you see along Massachusetts Street and along New Hampshire Street. So staff looked very carefully at those guidelines in Chapter 22 and found that even though this is not something that we typically see in the context area, that it would meet those criteria in Chapter 22 if you go through the individual criteria to see what they meet. They are leaving the building face and just building the area, enclosing that loading dock area. And similarly, I looked at the downtown design guidelines, and they really don't speak to loading docks or maintaining loading docks, because we don't really have those in the downtown area. And so staff went through those guidelines and found that it does meet the downtown design guidelines. So staff is recommending approval for the proposed project for both the certificate of approval and the downtown design guidelines. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
I've got one question on the exterior planters. Is that something, because I remember this kind of came up kind of post-COVID with outdoor seating, outdoor dining. Is the downtown design guidelines going to address the kind of parklet outdoor dining materials? Like, is that going to get?
That's all being addressed through the site plan that's currently under review too, and staff has looked at those materials, and they do meet the downtown design guidelines.
Okay.
And so staff has approved that for the site plan.
I didn't know if there was any discussion of adding a specific section to talk about that, since it's.
We did talk about the parklet and the materials and the changes at a meeting. I don't remember what month it was, but I do remember talking about that because there were changes of what was allowed during COVID to what is now allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember all that. I just don't remember
But where does
anything
it
ever
live?
happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and this doesn't qualify as a parklet because it's on their private property.
I see.
So that's why it's part of a site plan and not
Okay.
a parklet review.
Understand. Thank you.
Got it.
Any other questions?
Yes. So indoor seating compared to outdoor seating, what's the ratio?
We will have to ask the applicant. I do not know what that actual ratio is.
So what happens when it's 105 degrees out or it's minus 5 degrees out? Do we just have a vacant lot?
Likely, they will probably remove the table and chairs, and it would just be an open space area.
It would be nice to have some sort of plan B for that, so it just doesn't look like a vacant lot.
Initially, they had proposed to have parking there when they weren't having outdoor dining there, but that did not make it through the site plan review process because of the access to the property.
And the second question, I'm sure there's a formula to determine handicap spaces, but if we have a total of 7 spaces with one being handicapped, it would seem to me it would make a lot of sense to add a second or third handicap space.
Downtown is unique in that it doesn't have parking requirements. And so the number of accessible stalls is based on the parking requirements for the property. And so they are providing parking when they don't have to, and that is the proposal that they came forth with.
And there's no arguing that issue?
They went, as part of the site plan review process, our city engineer had to approve that plan, and he approved that.
I have a question as well. With the downtown design guidelines, there are guidelines that specifically address a rear facade versus the front facade, and there's a stipulation in the guidelines that the rear facade should not compete with the front facade. But in this case, you're taking one building and splitting it, and so that what was originally a rear facade is now going to be a new front facade, while the original front facade is, I don't
It's a mess.
anything is being done with it. It's a tricky question because I don't think this is outlined in the guidelines. Is there a precedent with other buildings downtown that span across an entire block where they've then been split up? Or is this kind of a first time we're seeing this?
This is a pretty unique situation. The only other time that we've come close to seeing a building that had more than one elevation fronting a primary street is when we looked at new development at 11th and Massachusetts Street. And for that development, the HRC was working with the applicant to have what would be a front-facing facade on all three elevations that were exposed to the street. And so this kind of works in that way where it's taking this loading dock area and making it more of a primary facade facing the street.
I'm sorry,
So-
there's some digital voice I'm hearing.
Yeah,
And I'm having trouble.
I think it's the wizard.
If
behind
anyone
the
in the audience has their phone, like, on a video or
it's the
something,
wizard
could you
behind
mute
the
it or
curtain.
put in headphones so we can hear? Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So the guidelines don't really speak to this situation. It is pretty unique for the downtown area to have a structure that's that large that faces more than one public right-of-way.
But doesn't this have an alley down the middle of the block?
It does on this portion of the
Okay,
building,
but not all the way through.
but not all the way through.
Understand. Okay, thank you. Is the applicant present and would they like to speak?
Is it okay to put up an image?
If we can figure it
Ooh,
out.
I don't think you can.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just wanted to make sure that we had the most up-to-date. My name is Patrick Watkins. I'm an attorney here in town. It's good to see you all again. It's been a few months, and new members, thank you for serving. I'm here on behalf of Q39. Dave Herron is here. He is an architect, and he's been managing this project. And we're back. We had a constructive discussion several months ago. We reviewed the whole project for Q39, and we came up with what I thought were fair resolutions. We went to the Architectural Review Committee. We talked about paint primarily, and we came up with what I thought was a creative compromise and one that was approved by your body a few months ago. Since that time, we have been through a range of other additional plans, and as Lynn correctly stated in her succinct summary, we had to make some changes. The site planning process required that we move our parking. We have an opportunity with some unused or underutilized space out front to put in some outdoor dining. And so that's what the designers have done, trying to accommodate and maximize the productivity of this site. And come up with creative solutions. To answer your question that you had before, there'll be 72 outdoor spaces, 194 indoor. But it's common to downtown restaurants. It's a dynamic that really has to be paid close attention to. You'll notice that in the winter months, we've got some chairs and tables stacked up, but they'll take good care of this area. It is the presentation. And to your comment, Commissioner, about the front and back of the building, we're trying to get a little bit of the best of both worlds in the sense that this is adaptive reuse. We've got to be creative, and we have planned an entry off of Mass, and it's part of our concept to be able to attract people to come down the alley and enter from the Mass Street side. But it is a dynamic situation. The design guidelines certainly do talk about front and rear facades, but they also talk about being flexible and not requiring that these guidelines be a checklist for development. So we are back. We're still open and agreeing to make all the commitments we previously made at our last meeting. We've had some discussions with Lynn and many discussions with the planning office about everything from those parking areas and ADA parking spaces to screening on the roof. That's been the latest discussion, is that we have some screening. It's 18 feet back off that front facade, but there will be hoods and other improvements on the roof that we will need to screen, and we intend to fully take that up with Lynn as needed. To the extent that it needs to be a discussion point today, I'm sure Lynn will advise you about that. But we have what we think are creative solutions, great design, a great opportunity for downtown, significant investment coming, and we're building upon the guidance that you provided us several months ago. If you have any questions about the design or what you're looking at today, any concerns, we are here to provide a response and hopefully get an approval from you today. So thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I've got one question for the architect or somebody. I know previously there was discussion about painted brick. I see on the elevations, it says stained. Can you clarify as to which treatment? Is it painted or stained, the existing brick?
We discussed that, and I don't know if you were here at that last meeting.
I wasn't.
I apologize, but we are going with stained.
Good, okay,
So that is what we've specified, and that's the path we're going down.
perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
So the change from what was approved to now, just to sum up, would be to extend that front east wall at the edge of the loading dock across and have glass overhead doors?
Correct. Everything's glass. So we had glass initially, and then we've now extended it. And we actually moved the front door. The original design had the door going through one of the two windows that are there.
Yes, I recall.
We actually moved the door to keep the two windows, and that's going to serve as the backdrop as the outdoor bar. So with the handicap spot that he mentioned and where the bar was, there's a circulation catastrophe about to happen. So we had to move the bar with the seating so to better service and allow free access.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't think so. So is there any public comment on this item?
I'd like to say one thing.
Sure.
I'm going to go ahead and beat this dead horse. You've got a total of 7 parking spaces. Obviously, the people cannot park and visit the restaurant. I think the overall design is great. While not required, it would make a lot of sense to add a handicap space. Why not?
Yeah.
So the majority of people can't park to begin with, but the people that really need to park, at least 2 of them could park.
Yeah.
It's not going to cost anything,
Sure.
all said and done.
We'll take it under advisement. There is some parking across the street that could be available, and then there's also, of course, the Riverfront Mall parking, which,
Oh, yeah.
which has a lot of excess space.
I'm not questioning parking in general, it's more the handicapped.
Sure.
And unfortunately, I've been in that situation, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, understood. We'll
Thank you.
take it under advisement.
Okay, commissioners, do you have any other, I didn't see any public comment, sorry to skip over that. Was there any? No? Okay. Commissioners, do you have any thoughts, or does anyone want to entertain a motion? I would like to entertain a motion.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to make a motion?
Let me get back to the agenda.
I'm motionless.
I move that we find that the revised project meets the standards of review in Chapter 22, Section 22507, and the design criteria in Chapter 22, Section 22508, and issue the certificate of approval for the proposed project.
I second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Motion number 2, for the downtown design guidelines, find that the revised project meets the development and design standards of the downtown design guidelines for the downtown urban conservation overlay district.
I second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Both motions pass. You're approved. Thank you.
May I make a comment in relation to this?
Commissioner Klein.
I just happened to read the Journal World today, and I noticed, Patrick, you had mentioned that the original developer of the entire project, Bryant, is no longer has a contract to buy the whole building, but the Simons owners are still trying to work something out. I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit about that.
Sure, this Q39 was able to purchase their space. They are the
Right.
But nothing really new to break there. I mean, I know the Simons are eager to have this property developed. It took some time to do what Vince Bryant had done. And frankly, in my opinion, he got maybe the hardest thing done yet, which is find a real attraction and an anchor for the site. But it was taking too long, I think, is what the consensus was from the sellers, and they were not able to extend. So you may see some more activity on this site in the coming months. Presumably, the Simons have some alternatives that they're looking to pursue. I don't represent them, so I can't speak on their behalf.
Sure.
I think on behalf of my other client, Vince Bryant, I think he appreciated the support he received. He still is committed to this project, but is not able to extend the contract at this time. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to public hearing item number 3, state preservation law and the Secretary of the Interior Standards. Would this be you, Katrina?
Yay, Katrina.
Welcome to our meeting.
I'm going to pass out some handouts before I get started. I may need Lynn's help to help with tech.
Cool, thanks.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yes.
Oops.
So, let me get to the microphone.
Sure.
And extras we can have at the end. Hi, my name is Katrina Ringler. I am the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer and the Director of the Cultural Resources Division. Formerly, I was the CLG coordinator. Gwen Perney is our new CLG coordinator. She has been with us for several months now, but her background is not necessarily in preservation. She's still kind of getting her legs under her as far as the standards go. And I've been doing this for 23 years, so I could do it in my sleep. And so I volunteered basically to come today and say, I will do this training, Gwen, if you will do the, all of the review of the minutes and the agenda and all the other things that we do as a CLG coordinator, and the evaluation that we do once every 4 years for our CLG communities, to just kind of make sure everything is wrapped up and we're keeping everything up to date. So I pulled up my notes on my phone here, so I'm sorry if I keep looking at my phone. I wasn't sure how the note situation would happen with the presentation, so thank you so much for the tech there. So the presentation today that I was asked to provide is a refresher on the Secretary of the Interior Standards and also the state preservation law and some other differences between local and state laws. So we'll go ahead and just kind of go through these. Basically, a refresher just to jog your memory. The certified local government, the city of Lawrence is one. They became a certified local government in 1989. And that was an agreement between the city and the State Preservation Office that was certified then by the National Park Service. And what a CLG really is, it just indicates that the city has a preservation ordinance that meets certain requirements of the program. It's a federal program, and when a community has an ordinance that meets those qualifications, they can ask to be certified, and the Park Service will do that. So this was done in 1989, and then it's been continuing up through today and will continue on. Those requirements of any certified local government for Kansas include establishing a local preservation ordinance, and that ordinance has to establish a preservation commission. Hi, welcome. Maintain an active survey of historic resources, which is something that every CLG should do. Establish a local landmark program. So there is a program here in the city to list things on your local historic register, whatever you call that. a landmark program or local designation. And then there is also a expectation that you participate in the National Register nomination process. So whenever my office, we receive a nomination to list something on the National Register, we always notify Lynn to make sure that you all are given an opportunity to review that nomination. If you have any comments, critiques, find typos, we hope that you will communicate that back to us, because you guys know the local history so much better than the state staff, and certainly better than the national staff. So, other things that a CLG can do, whatever is allowed by your ordinance is basically the answer to that. A lot of CLGs, as we just saw with a couple of the agenda items, you do design review per local design guidelines. Those might be for specific districts, overlays, citywide, but whatever your local ordinance says as far as design review goes, then you're allowed to do that. Other preservation-related functions. So if your ordinance allows you to do education, outreach, advocacy, those kind of things are also allowable. And in some jurisdictions, they even have funding incentive programs like tax incentives, grant programs. And so as I talk about here in a minute, one of the benefits of being a CLG in Kansas is that because we do have a state preservation law, there is an opportunity for communities that have been certified to enter into a separate agreement with us specifically to do reviews at the local level under that state preservation law. So let me talk a little bit, first of all, about COAs, which you guys just did one of those. Certificates of appropriateness, or more commonly now they refer to them as certificates of approval. They are under your local ordinance, so they have totally to do with your local preservation program. If the CLG program went away tomorrow, your local ordinance would still stand, the Preservation Commission would still meet, everything about your local program would still function. The state side of the state law that we're going to talk about would go away. Some of the other funding opportunities we'll talk about later would go away, but all of your local stuff would still stand. So one thing to keep in mind is that your local COA process only affects locally designated buildings and districts. If something is not listed on your local landmark list, then it doesn't get triggered for design review under your local ordinance. And so not necessarily a problem in Lawrence that I've seen, but some of our other CLGs across the state, they have been very focused on listing properties to the state and the National Register because of funding incentives that are out there. And they haven't done a lot of designation at the local level. And my concern with that is that if the state law ever does go away, it may be repealed or changed in some way, then your local ordinance doesn't apply to those properties anymore. And so local designation is really critical, and making the benefits of local designation, raising awareness about that to local property owners is really important. So under your COA program, you use standards that are adopted in the ordinance. To be a certified local government, it has to be the Secretary of the Interior standards or something equivalent. And you can use adopted guidelines as well. Just like we saw tonight, you were talking about different design guidelines for different neighborhoods and overlay districts. So those are added on top of the Secretary of the Interior standards usually. COAs are triggered by a permit, but not always. Some local ordinances say all projects, or they kind of define which projects are triggering the COA evaluation. And that can also be important to understand, because if it isn't triggered by a permit, then how does a property owner know that they're supposed to come to the board for a review? That can take some education and outreach. Some local ordinances have a environs provision, like Lawrence does. Not very many local governments, especially in Kansas, have that. Again, the state preservation law used to have an environs component, and that was repealed. So again, just a reminder that the state law isn't necessarily going to protect your local historic resources. It needs to be protected under your local ordinance. Some local ordinances also have a provision for economic hardship, and demonstrating that when a project doesn't meet the standards, if there is an economic hardship reason, there could be a provision in the ordinance that addresses that. Appeals for your local design review process are laid out, of course, in the ordinance, and it just depends on different localities. Some of them appeal to like a planning commission or the city commission, or some of them just go straight to, nope, the preservation commission is the final say, and that's it. So, on the other side of what you all are tasked with doing is the state preservation statute. So this is a law that is enacted at the state level by a state statute, and it is for properties that are listed in the state or the National Register, and that includes everything within a state or a National Register historic district. So I'm going to emphasize that. We'd heard about brick sidewalks earlier, brick streets, curbs and gutters, downtown sidewalks, those kind of things. If it's within the boundaries of the historic district and there is some kind of action by the government happening, it is supposed to trigger a review under the state law. We use the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. We're going to go through those a little bit as a refresher later in the presentation. But those are the standards that are used for the state law purposes. And I'll mention in a minute, you can also use local design guidelines on top of that, as long as those have been cleared with the State Preservation Office. The big kicker with the state statute is that the trigger is an action by the government. So the state or a subdivision of the state has to be undertaking, funding, or permitting a project. That often means the issuance of a permit, like a building permit or a demolition permit, but it also includes the work by the city or the county or the state. So if a state agency is undertaking the work or is giving a grant for a project, that also triggers state law review. It does include interiors. So in some cases, local ordinance reviews do not include interiors, but the state law, it does include interiors, the site, and the exterior of historic buildings. So the review that is done under the state statute is using the Secretary of the Interior standards to determine if the project will damage or destroy the listed property. So that is sort of the threshold that you're looking at. Does it meet the standards, but then also does that mean that it will or won't damage or destroy the historic property? And that can come into play with projects where maybe something doesn't strictly meet the standards, but will it damage or destroy the historic district? Is it on the back of the building? There's some flexibility there that maybe you at the local level, when you're doing your local reviews, would not have that flexibility, or vice versa. And so one thing to keep in mind is that when you're reviewing a project under both laws, that is triggered by both laws, let's say it's listed on the local register and the state and the national register, and Lynn, as the staff for the commission, will lay that out in the agenda that you're doing 2 reviews. There should be 2 motions and 2 votes because they could actually end up being different, and that's okay. The appeal under the state statute is to the local governing body, and their role is to determine if there are feasible and prudent alternatives to the project. Your role is only to look at the historic components of the project and determine if it will damage or destroy those character-defining features. If someone says, well, we understand your perspective on that, but we feel like this is a really necessary project and we really do need to move forward with it. For example, a demolition, maybe. Maybe a building is completely burned out. Maybe it's completely structurally unstable. Your role is to determine if demolition would adversely, damage or destroy the historic property. Obviously, demolition would destroy it, right? And you can't necessarily take into consideration the condition, but obviously, if it needs to be demolished because of condition, then that is something that the local governing body would take up. Is it feasible to do something other than demolition? Is it prudent to do that as far as safety for the community, or is this for the good of the public? The plans should take into consideration minimizing harm to the project, or for minimize harm caused by the project. So, for example, if you are in a downtown commercial area where there are party walls, and demolishing one building would adversely affect another building, then there needs to be planning to minimize that harm. And then ultimately, if someone is aggrieved by the actions of the governing body, they can sue in district court. So the state statute, it's important to understand, is not going to necessarily stop a project, but it is a process to make sure that the public has an opportunity to comment on projects in front of you all, in front of the city council, however they need to do that, so that there is transparency at the local level.
Quick question on that. Since we do have a structure that's burned out, and we'll likely get a demo request probably soon. You said we have to say it is going to destroy the district.
Usually, yeah.
And then that, in theory, in process, that means they just have to appeal to the city commission. If we decided, well, yes, it does destroy it, but we're still going to approve it to kind of expedite the process, during your audit, like what would happen?
I mean, it is something that we look at. We look at the minutes and kind of evaluate, like, are they making good, consistent decisions? And so if we consistently see that you're making decisions that don't follow the Secretary of the Interior standards, then we would question that. We would come to Lynn and kind of say, like, what was the story with that one? And we see this as a pattern. I mean, one project, probably not. We might ask Lynn, like, what was with that? And there might be extenuating circumstances. But if we were consistently seeing that you're not making decisions per the standards, then our agreement with you can be revoked.
Right.
And so we would take back those reviews at the state level and do them at the state level. Yeah. So this is just kind of comparing and contrasting to show, again, COA is local, state law is obviously a state statute. COA is for your locally designated buildings and districts only. State law is state and national register listed. You use the Secretary of the Interior standards. That's the standard across the board. As a certified local government, that's what we should be using. COAs could be triggered by a permit, but not always. So just one of the things that I do always recommend is read the ordinance, maybe once a year at least, to make sure you're aware of what it says, and advise, to staff if you think it needs an update, and making sure that it's staying up to date with what the needs of the community are. The state law is actions of the state or subdivisions of the state. And so the COA is, a lot of times it will be approve or approve with conditions or deny. That is the motion that you make. Whereas the state law should be, I move that this project either does or does not damage or destroy the historic property. And then the COA again appeals however it is in your ordinance, whereas the state law goes to the local governing body. So I was going to offer just a couple of little case studies to kind of pick your brain a little bit. If this is a locally designated property that they want to do window replacement on, what law would you say that triggers?
Did you say it's only locally listed?
Locally listed.
COA.
Right. We assume if window replacement triggers a COA, right? If that requires a permit, if that's something that your local ordinance says has to be reviewed. So this one gets to our question that we were just talking about. This is a non-contributor in a National Register listed historic district, and they want to demolish it. So what law would that fall under?
State.
Right. So assuming that the city has demolition permits, then it would trigger a state law review. And even though it's non-contributing to the district, it didn't have a lot of historic character to begin with, it still is something that has to be reviewed because it's within the boundaries of a register-listed historic district. This one is a city park listed in the state register, and they just want to repaint some of the stucco parts of it.
Is that Gage?
No, honestly, I don't remember. I pulled it off of KHRI. It's a little town out west somewhere.
State.
So because it's city-owned property, it's a city park, and even if it's the city staff who are going out there to do the paint project, that is supposed to come through the state law process because it's an action by the government. They are undertaking the project on a register-listed property. Rezoning proposal in a National Register listed historic district.
State.
Action by the government, action by the city. Rezoning may or may not have any kind of impact on a historic district depending on what the zoning change is, but things like parking requirements could have an impact. So it is good to have at least a cursory review of that under the state law. Solar panels, commercial building that's over 50 years old is not register listed.
We've been dealing with this lately.
But it's not listed,
It's not listed. It's not locally listed. It's not national or state listed.
and it's not reviewed.
This is a trick question.
Well, house in Lawrence, if it's within 250 feet of a house that is listed, it would trigger a COA.
Sure.
In Lawrence, yeah, if there's in the environs. This is actually something that would potentially be reviewed under federal preservation law.
Oh, my goodness.
Because if there is a federal undertaking, just like at the state level, if there's a federal agency that is funding, undertaking, or permitting a project,
If it's a grant or.
a grant or some sort of permit from a federal agency, then my office, the State Historic Preservation Office, would review it under federal law. And as a certified local government, you guys are our partners in all federal preservation actions. And so it is still within your purview as the Preservation Commission to comment on Section 106.
That up.
Yes, exactly.
trick.
Yeah. But, I don't necessarily think or even recommend that you comment on every solar panel, but there are other big Section 106 projects that go on in communities all the time, a highway coming through, a bridge being demolished, something that may actually really, perk your interest that you want to have a comment on. And just know that as a certified local government, you do have that partnership with us in the federal preservation program. Heaven forbid there is a natural disaster like we've seen recently. FEMA is a federal agency. They're coming in and they're going to be doing a lot of work. Number one, they're going to want to know where all your historic resources are. So hopefully you have a really good historic inventory, a survey. And then when they start making decisions about what needs to be done to those historic resources, the Preservation Commission should definitely have a voice in that. Any questions about the laws?
I wanted to make
Yeah.
a point of clarification, I think. We have, our Chapter 22 allows our preservation staff to do some of these reviews for us, and that's what we see on the consent agenda is when preservation staff reviews, and then, and we, the commission, we can pull items off that consent agenda if we feel like they need discussion. Just wanted.
Right, you can't rescind the approval, but you can direct staff not to do that again because you don't think it meets the standards. And most of the time, those are for design guidelines review or certificate of approval, but we do have a list, and it's online, of projects that staff can administratively review for state law review.
A lot of those are replacement in kind, like roofing materials and things like that. So Lynn or the staff can approve those, they can't do denials. So if she looks at something and she thinks this would be a denial, it does need to come to the full commission to make sure you guys get a hearing. So a couple of notes on the Secretary of the Interior standards. They are not laws. They are standards that are adopted as into regulatory laws. And so in and of themselves, they don't have authority. They're just guidance. But once they're adopted into a law, like your local preservation ordinance or the state statute or the Federal Preservation Act, then they become regulatory. And so that is a distinction that I always want to point out, that the standards only come into play regulatorily when it's triggered under one of those laws. So you could have a register listed historic property that is out in a rural part of the county where there are no permits, you're not using any kind of government funding, there's no government undertaking. You can follow the standards as a best practice, but you're not required to, because there's no law that would require you to do that. So looking through my notes here, very tiny. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. So the Secretary of the Interior standards are actually part of a bigger set of standards that we call the Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties, and they have 4 sections. A section for preservation, which is where you are basically protecting and maintaining a historic structure as it sits today. You're not trying to recreate it or restore it or even change its use. You're just simply preserving it as it sits. Restoration is where you are actually removing non-historic elements or elements that are not from the time period that you're trying to restore it back to. And you might repair or recreate elements to get it back to looking like it did at a certain date. Reconstruction is where you are wholly recreating sometimes the whole structure, but sometimes just portions of it. Like this is a building that was damaged during, I think, one of the world wars. And so they have recreated the areas where the damage happened. All of these approaches are pretty rare for folks in my office as well as Preservation Commission to see, because unless it is a museum, a historic site, mostly they're not going to follow those 3 preservation standards, just because most of us want to live, work, visit properties that have electricity, water, bathrooms, kitchens, that don't always come into play with those standards. So we primarily use the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. You're making it usable while preserving the characteristics that made it historic in the first place. You are restoring pieces of it, you're preserving pieces of it, you might be reconstructing pieces of it, but at the end of the day, you're making it usable for continued use. So here's just another definition: the act or process of making possible compatible use for a property. You're preserving portions or features that convey its historic, cultural, or architectural value. Get to my slides here. So the first thing we have to do when we are evaluating something and applying the Secretary's standards is really look at the property. And so it is critical when you're doing case reviews like you were doing tonight to make sure you have sufficient information. You need photographs, you might need plans, you might need specifications. You were talking about, you asked questions, is it paint or is it stain? Those could have, it seems like a small detail, but at the end of the day, you don't want to be surprised. You don't want to drive by the project later and think, I thought he said stain and now it's painted white. Like what happened there, right? That's a detail that could really change the project. So we always start by first looking at the building inside and out, depending on where the project is. Look at the features, the finishes, the materials. What age are they? Are they from the historic period or are they from a later change? Have they been modified? Is this a standalone building or within a historic district so that the impact of what they're doing on this property also has an impact on the surrounding district? or in your guys' case, when you're doing COAs for environs, there's that component of the entire environs at the local level. It is also important to point out that these character-defining features may or may not be outlined in the designation document. So the nomination that listed it to the local register or the state of the national register, if they're more current, they probably tend to outline those character-defining features pretty well, but some older documents tended to kind of just say, look at it, it's historic, and that's about all you get. So you have to kind of do that reevaluation now when you're doing the project review. So as you can see, these two properties are pretty different. One has a lot of character-defining features, and the other one has some character, not really much to write home about, right? So just as a general overview, I included this mostly so that in your handouts you could refer back to it later. It's sort of a shorthand of the standards for rehab. We're going to go through these one at a time here, kind of give you a sense of what each one of them is talking about and what their intent is. So standard number 1 is really about fitting the use to the property and vice versa. Properties should be used for their historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to those character-defining features, and not just the building, but the site and the environment as well. So, for example, putting a parking garage in a Victorian home, not going to work, right? Because it's not structurally going to work. You'd have to rip out all of the things that make it historic as a nice Victorian house. But you probably could put a parking garage in a concrete warehouse, and that would not necessarily be an incompatible use. Or in the case of this project in Wichita, you could put apartments into a parking garage and actually have front door parking in front of your apartment, which is kind of really cool. But there are some projects where you will get the sense of it as you start looking through the project, where there's just so many things that just don't fit. And at the end of the day, it may be that it is standard number 1. This use does not fit this building, or vice versa. Sometimes creative design solutions can solve the problem. This is an example I use a lot. These beautiful buildings, downtown area, the one on the left, new use for a drinking establishment. Local ordinance says you cannot have transparent windows into a drinking establishment. So they could have taken the tact of replacing that original storefront with something new and modern and aluminum, but creative design solution is just cover the glass with vinyl signage clings that are compatible, and now we don't have to rip out the historic character-defining elements. So it could have been the wrong use for the building or the wrong building for the use, but a creative design solution made it work. Standard number 2 talks a lot, I'm going to talk a lot about character-defining features because it comes up again and again. Standard number 2 says historic character or property should be retained and preserved. Removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property should be avoided. So this is an example I found on the internet one day. I was appalled, as probably most people would be. The one on the top is the before, and the one on the bottom is the after. And, there are a few things that they kept, like those little oval windows on the second floor, but they pretty much ripped off, destroyed, covered, obliterated all of the character-defining features that really made that house unique and special. And I just wanted to point out, it's not just the features. That standard also talks about spaces. And so, for example, things like a church where you have a very characteristic space on the interior, that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration and goes back to standard number 1. You could put housing into a church, but you're going to have a very large space. You can't divide it up into multiple housing units and still say that it meets the standards. This is just an example of another case where someone did not respect the character defining features of the building. At some point, this building had a metal slipcover on it, and the little pediments that stuck up above the parapet got cut off because they were sticking up above the metal. And so, that is not recommended. Standard number 3 talks about context of time. So properties are recognized as a physical record of their time, place, and use. One of, I think, the important things about historic preservation is that they are, when we preserve buildings, they become a tangible connection with our past. And if that connection is not real, then it loses meaning and significance. So changes that create a false sense of historic development, like adding conjectural features or architectural elements from another building, are not recommended and should not be undertaken. So adding features like these, what my boss calls Buckaroo Revival shingles awnings, to make something look more old-timey is not recommended. These buildings are from either the late 19th or early 20th century. They would have never had bare barnwood storefronts or awnings on them, right? They have pressed metal cornices. They probably had brick, metal, or maybe wood storefronts, but definitely not bare barnwood type elements. So architectural styles change over time, of course. But putting something that is just conjectural, that you don't know what it looked like, is not recommended. This comes into play also sometimes where we have, let's say, a little schoolhouse that the bell tower is missing, and someone wants to put it back, but they don't know what it looked like. They're not even sure where it was on the roof. And unless there is good documentation and historic evidence, then we don't recommend that, because it ends up being conjectural and it could be false. Historic changes, most properties, of course, like we said, change over time. Sometimes those changes acquire significance in their own right, and in those cases, that should be preserved. This is an example of a department store in downtown Hutchinson. The original department store was built in the 19-teens, and it had a very ornate brick facade with like swags of terracotta ornamentation on it. It was remodeled in the 1950s, and all of that was shaved off, and that black window in the middle was basically cut into the facade. And it was modernized inside and out for the 1950s department store. And so even though we know what that looked like from the 19-teens, we have photographs, we would not recommend someone restoring it back, because then it would be not authentic anymore. They basically would have to recreate that facade out of new materials. And so this facade is authentic to the 1950s and still matches what the interior looks like. Standard number 5 talks about, again, recognizing historic features and preserving those. It talks about distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques, which goes a little bit further, and it also talks about examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property. So this is an example of pretty much the only house that's left on Wyatt Earp Boulevard in downtown Dodge City. It's been converted into a coffee shop. And as you can see, they've done a pretty sympathetic rehabilitation. The little drive-through window on the back, the ramp going up to the craftsman porch. That's me doing work in what would have been the living room, but you can see back into the kitchen where there's a pass-through window. Down the hall where the spare bedrooms were is where the bathrooms are. They've kept the original windows, the siding, everything about the house that says this is a craftsman bungalow house. But it's a coffee shop, which is really cool. So going along with that, just to note, there are tons of resources on the internet, especially through the National Park Service. The preservation briefs are one of our biggest go-tos. They also have what they call interpreting the standards bulletins on their website. And so this is where we go a lot of times when we are trying to struggle with, we were talking earlier about maybe a swimming pool in a property. And it's like, well, let's go to the standards. Let's go to those guidelines, those green booklets that I handed out to you. Those are also available online with illustrations, and working through and seeing if there's something similar. They are set up with sort of recommended and not recommended, do's and don'ts. And so you can work through those to kind of get a sense of what is recommended under the standards. Standard number 6 is the big one that I think most of us are aware of, and a lot of people who have historic properties have at least a sense of. But I want to just point out that it is a 3-step process, and you don't always necessarily get straight to step 3. This standard talks about repairing first, and then replacing only when it's necessary, and then if you do have to replace to match. So deteriorated historic features should be repaired rather than replaced, step 1. So anytime someone is coming to the Preservation Commission with a recommendation to say, I need to replace my windows, okay, stop. First of all, why can't you repair the historic windows? Maybe they don't have historic windows. Maybe they're really rotted out, falling out of the building. Okay, now we're going to talk about replacement. Does the replacement match the historic? So if there is a historic window that is beyond repair and you want to replace it, how well does this visually match? It talks about matching design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. So materials are the least important of those visual characteristics. Replacement of missing features, where if you don't have the historic windows, need to be documented by substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. So again, we're trying to not put conjectural features back in a building. We want to make sure that there's good evidence, or at least having a educated plan based on the style of the building and the age of the building and that kind of thing. Remember that building? So going back, restoring missing features based on historic photos. In this case, they did have historic photos, but then they also just had the physical evidence of there obviously used to be pediments there, right? Standard number 7 is probably the other standard that a lot of people know, even if they don't know that they know. They probably know that you shouldn't blast a historic building. Gentlest means possible when you're trying to clean a historic building. Chemical and physical treatments that cause damage should not be used. And yes, that top one, that is brick dust that's on the ground, which is not a good sign. Surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, shall be undertaken using the gentlest means possible. And the if appropriate is important because it's not always appropriate to clean a 100-year-old building. Basically, we recommend that cleaning is something that you look at when either the dirt is causing harm, like it's actually damaging the structure, or like in the case of the State House, we're doing it because the repairs we're going to be making need to adhere to the historic materials and need to match the color. So we want to make sure, as you can see in that bottom, they do test patches to see what kind of cleaning would be the least destructive, most gentle, and would be the most effective and also cost effective for the project. Standard number 8 gets overlooked quite a bit. I will admit that I sometimes forget about it, but it has to do with archaeology. We don't want to forget that there are archaeological deposits under our feet, some very, very ancient and prehistoric, and some of them relatively new. So it's just something that when we are talking about projects that we're digging up something, like a new street project is going on in Topeka this last year. They were doing a downtown street project, and they found trolley tracks. And everybody was very excited about it. So if resources are disturbed, sometimes mitigation measures need to be undertaken, and sometimes that mitigation is just having an archaeologist come and extract the resources out of the ground so that they're not damaged, and so that something can be learned from them. I think the depot here in town is a great example of that, where the project that was restoring the depot, there was some archaeology that happened, and I think there's still an exhibit there, right?
Well, it's not there anymore.
It's not there anymore, but there was one. So now we're going to get down to standard 9 and 10, which are the two at the end, and they are both similar and related. They both talk about new additions, exterior alterations, new construction that's happening to a historic property. You don't want to destroy the historic materials that characterize the property. So again, that characterize the property, character-defining features are super important. If we haven't defined those already, then we don't know what's going to damage them. So we have to do that first. New work should be differentiated from the old and compatible with the massing size scale and features. So it sometimes can be a fine line to balance between differentiated and compatible. This is an example, again, in Hutchinson, where obviously, I'm going to say the 1980s, I'm not sure when, but someone decided to take out the storefront. They left the cast iron columns, which is very nice, but they put this interesting recessed storefront in. Differentiated, definitely. Compatible, not so much. But when new owners were doing an overall rehab of the building, they wanted to do something better, and they wanted to meet the standards. And so the storefront on the left took some cues from historic photos, and they did a compatible storefront. Now, it is aluminum. It is modern glass. It is not exactly to the proportions and dimensions of the historic photos, but it is definitely compatible with the historic building, and it's differentiated to the point where, no one is going to necessarily mistake it as an original storefront. Then we also talk about new construction. So, for example, infill within a historic district. You guys had that on your case tonight, where there's a new building happening next to an older building. Is it compatible? Is it differentiated? You were talking about the windows, the 3 windows versus the 2 windows, and what is the balance between, does it meet the standards, but we don't necessarily like it? So, there is a line sometimes between differentiated and compatible that sometimes doesn't mean we like it, but it does technically meet the standards. Standard number 10 is specifically about new additions and adjacent or related new construction, and making sure that the way it is built and designed and attached will make removal in the future so that it doesn't damage the historic property. And so we kind of call this the hyphen standard, because when we're doing addition to a historic property, we want to minimally touch that historic property whenever possible. So this is a Carnegie Library in Lincoln, where there was thankfully room to the back of the building to put an addition on, and the addition just minimally touches the back of the building where it has the least amount of character-defining features. The addition is lower and brought in from the sides so that it doesn't show from the front of the building. If it was removed in the future, yes, there would be some damage to the back of the building, but it's the back, and it would be fairly easy to repair that. You see there's 3 windows on the back of the building. There's not a lot of ornamentation. It would be easier to repair that than the side. And it also is compatible but differentiated in style. There's some similarities. Obviously, they use stone, the hipped roof, the red roof material, but the windows are different, and some of the other things, elements of it are different, that no one's going to mistake it for being original. Some other examples, just happens to be another Carnegie Library with a large addition on the back, but again, it's stepped back, it's attached with a hyphen. They've used stone, but in a different sort of texture to keep it differentiated. These examples maybe are not so compatible. They're differentiated, but they also are glommed on to the side of the historic building and would create a lot of change and damage if someone was trying to remove them. I love the one on the bottom. They tried to do 2/2 narrow windows, but it's on like this real weird mansard roof instead of the Italianate. I don't know. And I don't know if this comes up a lot in Lawrence. It's come up in other communities, but rooftop additions, same concept. It needs to be, compatible but differentiated, attached minimally. But then you also add the impact of the visual impact of them being so tall on the roof and above, looming over the historic building. So usually we don't recommend these on anything less than a 3-story building, and setting them back as far as possible to make them not visible. Same thing with other rooftop elements like solar panels, to set them back and keep them low to the roof line. Just as an example, another little case study for you guys to look at before we kind of wrap things up. Manhattan, historic Duck Walls building, contributor to their downtown historic district. Very unassuming building, not a lot of character defining features, right? Very plain. This is the proposal that was sent to us. This purple on the right was a rooftop addition that was proposed. And I don't know if you can see down the way, that large brick building is, I think, the Wareham Hotel, and then you can see the marquee for the Wareham Theater. That's the tallest building in downtown Manhattan, and this would have been like tall. And so the recommendation from the SHPO as well as the Preservation Commission was that is way too tall for basically a 1-story building, 1.5 stories or so. And so we looked at proposals that brought that down. It was going to be a restaurant and bar, and they still wanted to have a rooftop element. And so elevation drawings can be a little deceptive because you're kind of looking straight at the building, not really perspective like you would see from the street. But they could show us that they were pushing that back at least 20 feet, I think. And this was a rendering, and we kind of were like, okay, it's definitely better. In reality, you probably aren't going to see it as much as you would in this rendering. And we kind of forgot to look at the Christmas lights there. So, and that's something that sometimes gets forgotten about, because the ultimate way it was built, you can't see the addition at all, but you can very much see the umbrellas and the Christmas lights. And I've seen other projects where they have, palm trees and things, and it's like, I appreciate your comments, Brenna, today, where you're talking about the planters. Those are things that sometimes we overlook, that, it's not part of the construction or the architecture of but it's part of the site that can impact it. This is just a slide to kind of get your, feeling for which one of these do you think is a compatible new storefront for a downtown commercial property? Top right. Maybe hard to see. So the top right is a tax credit project, I think in Salina. You kind of look at the bulkhead, the large display windows, and the transom level. That is when we don't know what the historic storefront looked like in sort of an early to mid 20th century building. That's probably what we recommend. The other two are what we see a lot proposed, and they're missing that bulkhead. They're missing the display windows, or the bulkhead is glass. They have 2 or 3 transoms. And so that is something to kind of keep an eye out for if you're doing especially commercial reviews in like the downtown. We see a lot of, the one on the top left is Topeka, so you'll see a lot of those. Dark metal, dark glass, which creates a sort of a closed-off storefront, which is not historically characteristic. So just to kind of wrap it up, I wanted to reiterate, this is an example of those interpreting the standards bulletins that are available on the National Park Service website. I wanted to also put in a plug for Gwen and the Historic Preservation Fund grants that we do every year. Lawrence has at least one grant right now, right? And then LPA also has a grant happening currently, but there is an application round every year, and those applications are usually posted late in the year or early, so it'll be early 2025, and then they're usually due in March. Awards would be announced in June, and then there are 2 Septembers to complete the project because of the federal funding round. As a certified local government, you're not necessarily required to wait for those funding rounds because we typically have money to give away. One of the benefits of CLG status is that we have to pass through 10% of our federal funding every year to the certified local governments in the state. And we don't always have enough projects requested from the CLG. So we very much would like to give you our money. So please ask for it. Yes.
Question. Excuse me.
Yes, please.
Is there a limit to how many applications a city or a local historic resource committee can submit?
No, actually, I mean, submit as many as you want. We may not be able to fund them all. I always recommend if you are going to submit multiple to kind of tell us which ones are your priority. That way we make sure if we can only fund a couple of them, we fund the ones that are the most, the highest priority for you. But we've had CLGs in the past. In fact, Topeka has done, I think, 3 at a time, one time. So, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Here in Lawrence, obviously we have the historic characteristics, the defining characteristics, but we also have a criteria for people, important people. So I was just wondering, does the state have a similar set of criteria for historic people whose places, whether it's their place of residence or their place of business or what have you, ought to be preserved?
To be listed on the state or the National Register of Historic Places, you have to meet one of 4 criteria. So an event or trend is criterion A, and a significant person is B, and then C is architecture or craftsmanship, and then D is usually archaeology.
It's coming back to me.
Same, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So just a couple more thoughts about grants. The top left was actually a photo from a cemetery workshop that Douglas County Certified Local Government and Lawrence Certified Local Government sort of partnered with several years ago to do a hands-on 2-day how to repair and clean cemetery markers. So something like that is a great way to use the Historic Preservation Fund grant money. Middle right, you see some folks working on a house. They're actually taking off aluminum siding off of a house that then was later determined eligible and listed to the National Register. Survey is my biggest hit because, again, you have to have survey in order to know where the historic resources are. It's really hard to preserve something if you don't know where it is. And it's also really hard to learn the lesson of a natural disaster coming in and you not knowing where those historic resources are. So it makes the Section 106 process, the federal review process, go faster if you have good survey. And please save the date. The State Preservation Conference for 2025 will be May 7th and 8th. It will be in Topeka. So close to y'all. We have scholarships. Please let Lynn know if you want to attend and what kind of expenses you will have if you want to stay in Topeka overnight. We can reimburse for hotel, mileage, registration, and usually per diems. So let Lynn know how many of you want to attend, and that way she can ask us for scholarship. And I will also primarily tout May 7th, because we are having basically a full-day session where the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions is sending 2 trainers to come specifically for CLGs, commissioners and staff people. We're funding that. We're providing lunch, but it is like a 10 to 3 kind of all-day session. It will be at the State House, and that is something, if you can't come to anything else, please come to that, because I think it will be really valuable.
What date was that, Katrina?
May 7th. It is a Wednesday, so I know that that's the middle of the week. But and just Gwen and I, our contact information is there. So obviously, you guys have Lynn to ask questions and pass through things. But if you ever, your neighbor asks you a question and you think, oh, well, this isn't related to the Preservation Commission, I just want to ask somebody, feel free to contact us. Do you have any questions?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to emphasize one thing that Katrina and I talk a lot about, and I talk about with the tax credit reviewers and the reviewer that does the statewide state law review, and that is that there is no standard L or criterion L for like. And so you always, you can absolutely love a project and think it's the coolest thing in the world, and it may not meet the standards. And as much as you want to approve it, you have to be making your decisions standard-based. So always remember, there's no criterion L, and you have to stick with the ones you got.
Thank you for that reminder. All right, that closes out the public hearing items, so we're moving on now to Part E, miscellaneous items, and to our letter, draft of our letter to the City Commission on the Land Development Code. Did everyone have a chance to read that letter?
Yeah.
And are there any comments, discussions, additions, or deletions you would like to see?
I would like to see the language that's LPA used in their letter about the 2040 plan, and I've got the actual. So the Plan 2040, Chapter 4, Lawrence Neighborhoods and Housing Goals 3 and 3.1. The Plan 2040, Chapter 7, Community Resources, Historic Resource Goals 1, 1.7, and 1.9. And the Section 22, 210, B17 be added.
Added to the letter?
Yes. That way, I just feel like it really is our responsibility to participate in this process, not just because LPA reminded us that it was our duty to participate in the process.
Right.
And then staff had a question for your discussion. The Lawrence Preservation Alliance had recommended a moratorium on the demolition of 50-year or older structures in the survey areas, and your actual motion that you approved for the letter was for the HRC to review demolition of any 50-year or older structure with no indication what happens when you review it. I mean, what happens after that point?
That's a good point.
What do you review it by?
Yes, because we don't have any criteria to review it by if we don't have the survey complete. That is true, yes.
So you may want to have that discussion too, if you want to
Yeah, we need to
amend that number 3.
Revise number 3.
Is it that we don't have an end date as to when we want the moratorium to be for how long we want it to be imposed?
No, I think you would want to, and y'all had that discussion too, and we can add that to the letter too, if you change to ask for a moratorium and give a date final. We can add that to the letter too. Because I think we had talked about the end date being when the grant submission final documents are due at the last meeting.
So I do have a question with that. So let's say University Place gets surveyed and they decide to do a district. Oread design guidelines took almost, 8 to 10 years? So, I mean, there's one thing to have a district, and it's probably going to take a year to 2 years for that to get implemented and passed. What happens in between? So if we end the moratorium, and I do think we need to end it, but also if there's a submission, or even if we know we're going to move forward with a district, what happens before it becomes officially a district with standards to review it?
Right.
What happens in that interim time? Because then the moratorium's gone and the district isn't in place yet.
So it would still, I mean, there would be no review of that demolition. And the hope to having a survey is that if those permits come in, there's an automatic 30-day waiting period in Chapter 5 for demolition permits. And if we have that information, the hope is that we can work with Lawrence Preservation Alliance and the owner and try to educate them on the benefits of a historic structure and, hopefully what's coming down the line that could help financial incentive-wise. So, I mean, education is about the only thing that takes place during that time period.
Okay.
I think it might be appropriate now to hear from the representatives from Lawrence Preservation Alliance, if that's all right.
Sure.
With everyone. Mike or Dennis, would you like to say a few words about the concerns?
I've got to apologize. I'm hard of hearing, and the acoustics, particularly in the corner where
Yeah, they're not the best.
the heating system is working, make it especially hard. If I could take just a couple of minutes to address Commissioner's question. We asked you all, and we also asked the City Commission to impose this moratorium to provide a little bit of breathing space, hoping that sometime between now and the end of the survey in University Place, or hopefully even more quickly between now and the effective date of the new land development code, you all will have had an opportunity to kick those questions around among yourself and get ideas from staff, perhaps from the consultant, about ways that you could deal with this on an ongoing basis, not only in the areas where the surveys are presently planned, but in other areas that have large numbers of older buildings. I gave Lynn earlier, I've been thinking about this question some over the last week or so, and particularly after listening to the very late-running portion of the council meeting, the city commission meeting the other night. There is language in the overlay protections that extend to the Oread neighborhood, not only the historic district, but all the other portions that fall in there, that require HRC review of any demolition of a building older than 50 years. And the standard that they call for there is no demolition of a building of a character-defining structure is to be permitted. And it's your responsibility to make that determination. Staff provides the advice, as I understand it. And it seems to me, and I'm speaking for myself now, this is not something that LPA has knocked around at any length, but that's sort of an overlay in the older neighborhoods of town would ameliorate the problem that we identified, that is, the incentive to scrape older buildings in order to create space to provide the additional density that the new land use code. The land use code doesn't govern demolitions, which is something I didn't know until we had a conference with the planning director the other day. That's in a different part. That's in the building code. So it's likely that whatever ideas the HRC comes up with are going to have to target the building code, changes to the building code. But in the meantime, it seems to me that an approach like the overlay that applies to Oread might well address the problem. And then, as you get more and more applications for this sort of stuff, the HRC will have an opportunity to think further about it and tinker, and the City Commission and Plan Commission will have the same opportunity. But the moratorium at least would protect the city from the embarrassment of paying to have buildings surveyed that aren't going to be there at the end of the survey if the new code goes into effect April 1st and there's no provision for reviewing demolition permits other than the 30-day delay, because there's no prescription that calls for HRC review of those demolitions. So I think LPA's position, as it was reflected in the letter, and Commissioner Finkeldey indicated as a part of the commission time at the very end of the meeting, he wants this issue on a future city commission agenda in order, I think, to have some sort of a vote on it. I don't know people's minds, but I saw a number of other heads nodding like they'd read our letter too, and may be inclined to do that. But in any event, that was, I think the fact that they don't contemplate that the effective date is going to be until April provides a little bit of time, but not a lot, for the HRC to grapple a little bit with this and ask staff for help in fashioning a recommendation to the commission that might address this core problem. What do we do to promote the ability to fill currently open lots without producing such an incentive to tear down buildings to make more open lots?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So if we did ask for a moratorium, I'm wondering when that ends, because I don't feel like we can say, stop tearing down any building. I mean, that's not for forever. So we have to say an end date. Like, when is that? When the survey is complete, or in your mind, what were you thinking?
My suggestion is for present purpose to say until the survey is complete.
Yeah, for present.
The survey won't be complete until late next year or later in the year next year. And if it looks, as a result of the information that you're getting from the survey, that it's likely that there may be support for you can always ask the commission to extend the moratorium for another 6 months or a year, or until the nomination process is complete. But this would at least provide enough time when nobody is going to be in a position to demolish any of those buildings to ensure that doesn't happen while you all continue to focus on the problem. And I've indicated this before, and I'll reiterate it. LPA will work as closely as you all are interested in having us work with you and with staff to try to fashion an appropriate balance between preserving older buildings and older neighborhoods' character and still getting the city's density objectives satisfied.
Commissioner Klein?
But I would also add, not only wait on demolitions until the survey is completed, but wait until future surveys have yet to be decided. You know, again, I've been arguing since last July that I would like a survey done of the remaining portions of East Lawrence, but there's nothing, and nothing's been, there's been no action on it, and we still have not had a work plan study to discuss that, and so I'm very concerned about homes that are going to be, that could be demolished before we even get a survey going that would cover those other properties.
One potential answer to that is to use the time between now and April 1st
Figure it out.
to come up with a plan maybe that looks like the Oread neighborhood overlay that protects 50-year-old structures wherever they are in the city, or if not all through the city, at least in the original town site and the first ring of suburbs, you know, Barker and University Place and Old West Lawrence and North Lawrence and East Lawrence. And there is time. I mean, y'all don't meet but once a month, but there are ways to you know, to sort of carry on this work and to get some ideas so that you're in a position to consider them, and to have that work well in hand before the effective date of the new land use code, and to be able to get those recommendations in front of the city commission. So concurrently with the effective date of that, they could adopt some sort of protection for older buildings throughout the city, not just in the survey area.
So I guess I had the same thoughts about using Oread as an example overlay, but maybe we need to mention in the letter, here's a moratorium, start and stop. Meanwhile, we're going to work on addressing demolitions throughout.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at. Because we can't ask for review of demolitions if we have nothing to review against.
Right.
So we're asking for a moratorium until the survey is complete. But sometimes surveys get drug out, so they're probably going to appreciate a timeline on that. So we could say from the time the land development code is implemented, which we think is April 1st, until the survey is complete, or 12 months, whatever it is. Whatever comes first. And then that gives us time then to have a work session for identifying survey areas and to work on a design guideline overlay. But is 12 months enough? I think the Oread design guideline process was quite lengthy and painful.
But got it done.
Yeah. So that would give us 18 months, I guess.
So when will we have a work plan to do that?
So that was going to be my last miscellaneous item, was to talk about that.
So let's get through the letter.
Let's get this one wrapped
Okay.
up, and then we'll
Can I
talk
ask a
about that
question?
one. Yes.
So where will we be getting pushback from this?
Where,
Well, it seems a no-brainer to me that we do the moratorium. So who's going to push back on this?
the city commission likely,
Yeah.
For which reason?
public
Affordable
pressure, yeah,
Obviously.
yeah.
So is there something we can do? I'm assuming there's plenty of property that will be available without any sort of demolition, as it sits right this moment, that could benefit from the new zoning.
Yes.
Is that correct? So is there anything we can do to encourage that development, to let the developers, the property owners go ahead and move forward with the benefits of the new zoning without having to get into the demolition of things? Give us more time, in effect.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think that it would take study of the land development code to understand what we're asking for, and we would need to suggest language and position for that language in the revision.
And our local building code, which apparently addresses demos, and maybe that's what we focus on, more on what our demo process is and what is reviewed, what triggers review,
And then the standards for those reviews.
Right.
Yeah,
Not so much the land development code.
right. Maybe, I think.
Yeah.
I get you.
It's very long.
No one can imagine. Board.
Yeah. And I think the general intent is to increase density. And so we are thinking it's going to impact the historic neighborhoods. Yes, Mr. Delaney.
One further point to the commissioner's question. There's no particular pride of authorship here, but in the letter that we drafted for the city commission, we expressly indicated that we didn't have a problem with going ahead and implementing the provisions of the new land use code, at least once it's finished. What we were looking for was protection for 50-year-old structures from being demolished in order to take advantage of that. And using that language from our letter or something that makes that point, it seems to me, puts the HRC behind the notion that the general underpinnings for the new code are perfectly okay. I mean, the details still may need some work. And that the HRC doesn't object to the infill language. Actually, one of the things that the new land use code does is it adopts some of the principles that are in the Oread overlay. That is, development has to be compatible with the, sort of the current character of the neighborhood. So the redevelopment, at least in terms of size and scope and scale and those sorts of things, is going to have to match the existing neighborhood on a currently open lot. The key problem, at least a key problem that we see, is we don't want a whole lot of new open lots created for people to put new development in as a result of the new code. But it seems to me that there's no reason for the HRC to take issue with the underlying precepts of the new code. It's just, you haven't thought about protecting older structures. Here's our suggestion about how to do that in the interim, and we're going to come up with more suggestions about how to do it in the long run, which we'll give you when the time comes.
Good evening, Commissioner. Dennis Brown of Lawrence Preservation Alliance Board. I was on the Zoom call with the consultant too, and the first thing we did was, and city staff was there too, is we asked the question, this issue with redevelopment and our concern that the incentives would just kind of cause a wildfire in historic neighborhoods that are mostly or 50% rental, whole house rentals. Was there something in this 500-page LDC document that we weren't seeing, that we weren't understanding? And the answer we got was no. This is an issue. And the consultant did say during that meeting too that the steering committee on several fronts, not just this one, but I think there were other things that came up, had the question of, do we want to, in the LDC, treat certain neighborhoods differently than others? And each time they came to that discussion, they decided no, they wanted this to be for the entire community. So we know we've got a problem, and the moratorium, which I'm feeling somewhat positive about with the City Commission, is going to help with those two surveying areas, but also buying a little bit of time if the City Commission says, okay, HRC, we are interested in seeing what you can come up with over this period of time. I think we were talking about September 30th at the last meeting as the time when the moratorium would end. I'm just throwing that out there. To come up with some ideas that, okay, the answer to our concerns isn't in the document. What can we do in that amount of time? And Michael is certainly correct that LPA wants to help as much as possible. But I don't see if HRC is allowed into this conversation by the City Commission, and I think they probably will. It's not something that's going to be handled in a monthly meeting. I think there'd have to be a committee formed. It could be present commissioners. You might consider previous commissioners. I know there's been some really good talent come off the board that are experts in planning and architects. But I think that would be something that you guys would want to consider, so that you'd have a separate group that's meeting maybe 2 or 3 times in between the regular HRC meetings and reporting back in committee reports to you, so you can discuss where they're going with it.
Thank you. So I would propose that we reword the second part of the letter to remove urging the city commission to meet with the project, or allow the project consultant to meet with 2 HRC commissioners. And then revise the third item to be urge the city commission to impose a moratorium on the demolition of any 50-year-old or older structure that is included in an area which a historic survey is scheduled to be conducted until the survey is complete from the time that the land development code is implemented, or 6 months after that time, whichever is sooner. So if the survey's complete, the moratorium's over. If the survey's not complete and 6 months has gone by, the moratorium is over. But I also want to add a request. I don't know if it's a request, to rewrite Chapter 5 demolition sections to require review by the HRC for structures 50 years old and older. And during that time, that 6 months, or from now until those surveys are done, the HRC, create an overlay with standards for review. I do feel like that's an aggressive timeline.
6 months, I think, is short.
It's way too short.
But I think we need to get started.
You know, as you were saying, wait until we get pushback. But, you know, ask for a year, 2 years. Because it's that
The
important.
worst they can say is no.
Yeah.
Okay, so change the 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
At minimum.
But it might not hurt to put some other language in there reinforcing agreement with the overall plan, as they mentioned.
Yes.
So we
I
do,
agree.
I can speak for us, but I think the increased density is a good plan. And so if we can support that in some way, so we're not just saying, no, we don't want to do this, but we do want to do the overall plan, and this is one of the concerns we have about this. Kind of be on the same team as opposed to being opposition.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we could put a sentence in there about, or 2.
Well, I think that's how you kind of bracket what you said with, we want to revise Chapter 5, and we need some time to come up with the recommendations of what we want to recommend for that. So say, you know, like, we're in favor of the LDC, but we also need to look at Chapter 5 as part of that to make sure we don't have unforeseen consequences.
And realistically, there's not that many property owners and developers. So let's say there's 20 of them. They can get moving quickly on these open lots. if they wish. So nothing's being held up.
Is that sufficient direction, or do we need to review
If
that?
you could put it all together and then take a vote on it, we will send you, as chair, a revised copy. If the rest of the commission agrees to let you have the final say on the letter, and then you would sign the letter and we would forward it to the city commission.
Okay. So I believe the first part of the letter we already have drafted that references, that we received public comment. That is all good, and we'll keep that. And where it starts at after discussion, the Historic Resources Commission supports the Land Development Code revision. And as the HRC's purview or responsibility is to protect the historic resources of Lawrence.
The chapter 4, chapter 7, and then section 22. That language.
From the letter,
Yeah.
from the LPA letter.
So it's Plan 2040, Chapter 4, Goal 3 and 3.1, under Lawrence Neighborhoods and Housing. The Plan 2040, Chapter 7, Community Resources, Goals 1, 1.7, and 1.9. And then under Chapter 22, Section 22, 210, B17.
And we're forwarding this letter to the City Commission with the following requests.
So I think it's actually 4 requests now, isn't it?
It's the moratorium request. It's the rewrite of Chapter 5.
That's the new one.
What would be the other two?
Well, the first one was that HRC gives input to the revised LDC.
I don't think we need to.
Yeah, I don't think we need.
I think we've removed that one.
Okay. Then the second one is urge city commission to direct the project consultant to meet with. We already have.
We already have, so we've
We
removed that.
that one. Okay, so it is still 3. Got it. Never mind. I can't count.
Yeah, just keep the LPA language.
So then 3 would become revised chapter 5.
Yeah, we only have 2 asks, the moratorium
yeah.
and the rewrite.
Okay, even better.
Good.
You will need to, if everyone agrees to that, you need to take a vote that summarizes that, that's what you want in the letter, and that the commission authorizes the chair to do the final language and sign the letter.
Okay. I move that we ask staff to draft a letter to the City Commission that points out that we've received a letter from LPA, that we've discussed it, and we support the Land Development Code change. And we have 2 requests, a moratorium on the demolitions for a stipulated time, and then a rewrite of Chapter 5, pointing out that there are 2 surveys going on currently. And that the commission gives the chair the right to review the draft, revise if necessary with staff, and staff will send that to the City Commission.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Say
Aye.
Opposed? Nope. Motion passes.
So how do we create a committee to start working?
In our working session,
Yeah.
Miscellaneous, did you have any other miscellaneous items?
No.
Lynn? Okay. I believe we need a working session. Do we have a full agenda for November?
Hold on just a second, let me check. Right now, you have tentatively scheduled 2 full commission items.
I mean, similar to this evening?
No, this evening was more a review of projects you'd already approved, so those go a little bit faster, I think. These one is for the demolition of an accessory structure in the Oread neighborhood, and one is for partial demolition and new addition, which is a certificate of approval in a context area. And then we know in December, you will have the landmark nomination for the First Presbyterian Church, the building only.
Okay, that
should go quickly.
Interesting.
Is anyone receptive to a different day, afternoon, evening?
I'm open to a different day entirely. I mean, I just think it's important enough that we need time to discuss and not feel pressured with the clock.
Would it be necessary that all commissioners be available, or would it be appropriate to create a subcommittee?
I think it would be appropriate to create a subcommittee. Yes, and we still need to do the working session, I think, for the survey area.
Yeah.
With all of the commissioners, because that's a commission's responsibility, right?
But the commission could appoint a subcommittee to do the work and bring back a proposal
So be ready for
or a
November.
work plan to the commission.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Commissioner Klein, would you like to develop a committee?
Well, I personally would prefer all of us to be on it as
Well,
opposed
that's
to
what
a
the work
committee.
session is.
So you collect the data and then we do the work session together.
What data am I collecting?
How might we approach a survey priority for the county, for the city?
Because the only thing I've talked about, again, from last year was the rest of East Lawrence. I can look at the Lawrence Historic Resources map, and I could say, oh, look at these empty spaces. Let's do surveys for these other empty spaces. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure what you're asking me, what.
Well, this was your idea,
Because that's why I wanted-
so I'm trying to.
Oh, it is mine. No,
I'm trying to kick off
thank
the
you.
idea.
I'm happy to do that, okay? I'm just saying, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I mean, I'll do East Lawrence, look at East Lawrence, and then, because one of the things we also mentioned at some other meeting was that some of us would like to see the Barker survey redone. That's a whole project.
There's also North Lawrence, and there's.
Well, yeah, there's North Lawrence, oh my God, North Lawrence, and there's.
Yeah, so these are the things that I'm thinking
Right.
that a smaller group of people would brainstorm
Okay.
and then bring that list to the working session.
So who wants to be on that subcommittee? Now, but how does the subcommittee work? We meet separately, or?
It's like the
But we still have to be in public, right?
Yes, it would still.
We can't just have coffee at a shop or something.
No, it would need to be a public meeting, but you can have a subcommittee meeting where you don't take public comment, but it would have to be accessible to the public.
Right. Okay, so who would like to be on the committee? As he looks the other way.
But I'll do it. What are we actually going to be doing then?
Well, that's part of what I'm asking, how and when, and
You need to identify what areas still need to be surveyed. And then of those, what you recommend we prioritize.
So is it just two of us on the committee? Can we have three?
You can?
I'll volunteer to serve on the subcommittee as well.
Okay.
And do we need a subcommittee for chapter 5?
Yes, I don't know the mechanics of it, though. If we are allowed to rewrite Chapter 5, don't we need approval from the city commission? A response?
Well, I don't think it wouldn't necessarily be a subcommittee to rewrite Chapter 5. It would be a subcommittee to investigate demolition review requirements for historic properties that are 50 years or older in the city of Lawrence.
That makes sense.
Okay.
So to clarify, the wording in Chapter 5 for demolition right now for the notice requirements specific to the Historic Resources Commission is that if an application is received for a building that is designated as a landmark or within a district where it's in environs, the Historic Resources Commission must be notified. And we're looking to revise the current language to expand it to any building 50 years or older.
Potentially.
And I think that sounds like a fairly simple revision.
It's like a Section 106 review that I think that the federal government does.
Chapter
5. When there's federal funding, they look if there's any resources that could be significant, historically significant. So that's what we would be doing if a 106, or if a...
And staff has already started working with the SHPO to try to identify other cities that have ordinances like this. So we might have some samples to look at from other cities where they do demolition review. And so we would help the subcommittee with that kind of information.
That would be great. That'd be very handy.
Okay. I'll be on that committee.
I'll volunteer.
Does it require a second subcommittee? Or would it be the same subcommittee?
I think it'd be a different one because we're
Yeah,
talking about
there's the
two
survey
different
and-
things.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, very good. All right, anyone have any other miscellaneous items? If the answer is no, then I move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.